Ashley Mead's life seemed like a perfect snapshot of suburban bliss. A 25-year-old mother with a bright smile, her days were filled with the joy of raising her daughter, Winter. Boulder, Colorado, a peaceful town nestled between mountains, was the perfect setting for a family to thrive. To the outside world, everything appeared idyllic, but beneath this surface, a much darker reality was quietly unfolding. Ashley lived with Adam Densmore, her ex-boyfriend, and the father of Winter. Despite their separation, they continued to co-parent for the sake of their daughter, trying to maintain an amicable relationship. But Ashley had her reservations. Though she tried to make it work, the cracks in their relationship were impossible to ignore. Every time Ashley and Adam interacted, it was as though a storm was just waiting to break. Adam's temper was unpredictable, and Ashley had learned to navigate their days carefully. She often found herself walking on eggshells, unsure of when the next eruption might come. "I think it's fine, really. We're just trying to figure out co-parenting," Ashley would say when friends asked about her living situation. But those close to her knew something was off. There were whispers about Adam's controlling behavior, his jealousy, and his inability to let go of the relationship. One evening, Ashley opened up to her best friend, telling her what had been eating away at her for months. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and fear. "He won't let go. I think he's always watching me, trying to control everything. I just can't breathe anymore." Her friend, who had seen Ashley's vibrant spirit, could hear the desperation in her voice and immediately knew the gravity of the situation. "I don't know what to do," Ashley continued, "but I can't live like this. He's just too possessive. I don't know when he'll snap, but I feel like I'm running out of time." At the same time, Ashley's friends saw the loving mother that she was, the woman who always made Winter her priority. The sadness in her eyes, however, never went unnoticed. She was stuck in a toxic relationship, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences would reveal themselves. One afternoon, as Ashley sat in her cozy living room, looking over Winter's school assignments, a plan started forming in her mind. She knew she had to leave. But the thought of uprooting Winter's life, the thought of taking her away from the only father she knew, was paralyzing. "I'll wait just a little longer," Ashley would tell herself, putting off her plan. Maybe things would get better. Maybe Adam would change. But deep down, she knew the truth. Nothing would change until she found the strength to escape. It was then, late one evening, when the tension between Ashley and Adam reached its peak. He walked into the room, his eyes clouded with anger. They exchanged heated words, the argument escalating in an instant. Ashley tried to stand her ground, but Adam's fists clenched, the air thickened, and for a moment it felt like the world stood still. But then, just as quickly as the storm began, it passed. Adam's anger dissipated, and he left the room, leaving Ashley shaken, her heart racing. She didn't want Winter to hear or see any more of this, so she buried her fear and wore a smile. The next morning, however, something changed. Something shifted in Ashley. She knew she couldn't keep going like this. But how could she escape? How could she keep Winter safe? As she prepared for another day of uncertainty, a nagging feeling gripped her chest. She was afraid of Adam, afraid for her daughter. The fear lingered as she looked at Winter, her eyes bright with innocence, unaware of the darkness that threatened to consume their lives. That day, Ashley decided she would finally leave. She just needed a plan. But before she could take action, something happened, something that would change everything. It was a cold February morning when Ashley failed to show up for work. Her absence wasn't like her. The coworkers who knew her best found it strange. Ashley was always reliable, always there, always smiling. But that day, she didn't come in. She didn't pick up her phone either, which only heightened their concern. By mid-afternoon, whispers of her disappearance had spread through her workplace. Was she sick? Had something come up unexpectedly? Everyone assumed it was a temporary thing, just a minor absence. But when hours turned into an entire day, the situation grew more serious. Ashley's friends began to call. They left message after message, but no answer. Panic started to creep in, especially when they learned that Adam, her ex, had been seen with her the day before. No one had seen her since. He told them that Ashley was taking a break, a sudden trip he claimed she hadn't told anyone about. But that explanation didn't sit right with anyone who knew her. Detective Sarah Donovan was the first to suspect something wasn't adding up. As a seasoned investigator, she had seen her fair share of disappearances, and this one had too many red flags. The phone records from Ashley's phone showed she hadn't made a single call that day. Her social media was silent, and the last text she'd sent was to a friend, but it was a simple, "I'll be home later," with no mention of a trip, no warning, nothing that would indicate a break. When Detective Donovan questioned Adam, his story was strange. He didn't seem particularly worried about Ashley's absence. His tone was casual, as if he didn't believe it was worth any serious concern. When asked where he'd gone with Winter, his daughter Adam said he had taken her out of town for a quick getaway. He was vague about the details. The inconsistencies in Adam's story started to grow. He claimed they'd gone to visit his mother in Oklahoma. However, his travel receipts showed that they hadn't taken the trip until hours after Ashley had gone missing. The timeline didn't line up. And as Detective Donovan dug deeper, she learned that Adam's alibi was, at best, shaky. A few more hours passed, and the missing persons report was filed. The police had no reason to believe foul play had occurred, but something about the situation gnawed at them. Detective Donovan called in reinforcements, and they began tracking Adam's movements, starting with the last known location of Ashley's car. They found that the vehicle had been parked near a secluded area on the outskirts of town. When Adam was confronted about this, he insisted it was nothing, just a place to stop for a few moments during the drive to Oklahoma. But his story was full of holes. As the day went on, Ashley's family grew more anxious. Her mother called Detective Donovan, explaining how Ashley had been more and more distant lately, but she couldn't imagine why she would have left without telling anyone. There were no signs of any trouble or violent altercations, at least none that her family had witnessed. Detective Donovan felt the weight of the case settling heavily on her shoulders. The case didn't feel right. She needed more answers. And then came the breakthrough. One of the neighbors had a security camera. When the footage was reviewed, it revealed something chilling. Ashley had been seen leaving her home the evening before she went missing. She wasn't alone. Adam was with her. They appeared to argue briefly before Ashley walked out of the frame, and Adam followed behind. The camera didn't catch anything beyond that, but it was enough to confirm her last known whereabouts, and to confirm that Adam was involved in some way. The mystery deepened. What had happened between them that day? Why did Adam seem so indifferent? Where was Ashley, and why hadn't anyone seen her since? As the investigation progressed, the deeper they dug into Adam's past, the more unsettling things became. But nothing could have prepared them for what they would uncover next. Adam's seemingly innocent departure with Winter was about to become a critical piece of a much darker puzzle. As Detective Donovan sat in her office reviewing the latest information on Ashley's disappearance, a disturbing realization began to settle in. The more she investigated, the more she uncovered about Adam Densmore, and the clearer it became that his story was filled with holes. Adam had been the last person seen with Ashley, and his behavior was becoming more suspicious by the hour. His calm demeanor, his inability to show genuine concern for Ashley's sudden disappearance, it didn't add up. The surveillance footage showing Adam and Ashley arguing before she walked out of the house was the first glaring sign of trouble. But it wasn't enough. Donovan knew she needed more to unravel the truth. Her team had started digging into Adam's history, starting with his phone records and financial transactions. They quickly discovered that Adam had made an unusually high number of purchases around the time of Ashley's disappearance: fuel, snacks, and even a camping supply store in Oklahoma. But what really caught their attention was the pattern. He had bought supplies not long before leaving Boulder, and all his purchases seemed to point to a long drive. But if Adam had truly been planning a spontaneous trip to Oklahoma with Winter, why had he been so meticulous in his spending? The timeline of Adam's actions didn't make sense either. Ashley had been reported missing on February 12th, but Adam hadn't left town until the morning of the 13th. If he had truly been concerned about her disappearance, why wait an entire day to leave? It was as if he had known he had time. The inconsistencies were piling up, and Detective Donovan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Adam was hiding something much darker. The breakthrough came when the team located Adam's ex-girlfriend, Kelly, who had remained in touch with him after their breakup. Kelly told the detectives that Adam had always been controlling, and she revealed an unsettling truth. She had heard Adam talk about how he couldn't let Ashley go. "He told me once that if she ever left him, he'd do whatever it took to keep her from getting away," Kelly said. "He was obsessed with her, and even after they broke up, he couldn't accept it. It wasn't just about love. It was about control." Kelly's words sent chills down Donovan's spine. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a case of something far more sinister. Adam's obsession with Ashley, his inability to accept their breakup, and his need to control her all pointed to a dangerous motive. With this new information in hand, Donovan requested that Adam be brought in for questioning again. His story remained unchanged, but this time he was more defensive. He claimed that everything was fine, that Ashley had left him for a short break, and that he was simply being a responsible father by taking Winter to visit his family in Oklahoma. But something in his demeanor told Donovan that he wasn't being truthful. She pressed harder. "Why did you wait so long to leave, Adam? And why are you so calm about Ashley's disappearance?" Adam shifted uncomfortably, but his answer never changed. He simply insisted that there was no foul play involved. He maintained his innocence, but Donovan could see through it. His story, his lack of genuine emotion, it was all a facade, a carefully crafted lie to cover his tracks. The investigation continued, but every lead seemed to circle back to Adam. The more they uncovered, the more the web of lies tightened around him. And as the days passed, the detectives began to piece together a terrifying truth. Ashley had known she was in danger, and Adam had been preparing for something he had planned all along. Donovan knew they had to act fast. The truth was out there, but it was buried beneath a sea of lies. And if they didn't move quickly, the consequences could be even more devastating. The morning sun had barely risen when the call came in. A body had been found in a remote part of Okmulgee, Oklahoma, a place the detectives never thought they'd have to visit. It wasn't just any discovery. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for, yet it was something they dreaded all the same. Detective Donovan had to brace herself as she made the drive to the site. Her mind raced. They had been following Adam's every move, tracking his whereabouts with growing suspicion. Now here they were, standing at the edge of a field, where a piece of evidence lay hidden beneath a pile of trash. As the crime scene investigators carefully lifted the debris, the officers uncovered a suitcase. It was weathered and old, but it stood out. No one could have predicted what they would find inside. The zipper was half open, as if someone had tried hastily to seal it, but when it was opened fully, it revealed something that would haunt them forever. Inside the suitcase were human remains, scattered, mutilated, and unrecognizable. The body had been hacked apart with what appeared to be a blunt instrument, the pieces of flesh haphazardly thrown together with no care. There was no dignity in the way the body had been treated. This was not a simple crime of passion. This was calculated, methodical, and designed to erase any trace of Ashley Mead. Detective Donovan felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she stood over the suitcase. She had seen death before, but never like this. The brutality of the act left her speechless. How could anyone do this to another person, to the woman who had been someone's mother, someone's daughter? But there was no time for sorrow. They had to act. The victim was clearly Ashley, and this discovery confirmed what everyone feared. She was dead. The scene was secured and the body was carefully removed, but the investigation had only just begun. Forensic experts immediately began to examine the remains. Each piece of the body would be analyzed, and any trace of evidence that could lead them back to Adam was crucial. Donovan stood by, watching as the investigation unfolded, feeling the weight of what had just been discovered. This was no ordinary case. This was a woman's life, her future, her potential, all erased in one brutal act. The question that loomed now was, why? As the evidence was processed, a shocking detail emerged. Ashley's body had been dismembered at different locations. Parts of her had been scattered over miles of land. It wasn't just an attempt to hide the body. It was an attempt to erase Ashley completely, her identity, her existence, and the life she had built. The detectives quickly turned their attention to Adam. The pieces were falling into place. Adam had been seen in the area just before the discovery of the suitcase, and forensic evidence from his car placed him at the scene where the remains were disposed of. In the following hours, investigators traced Adam's movements using credit card records. His purchases for fuel, food, and camping supplies all aligned with his drive through multiple states, but his timeline continued to raise suspicions. He was trying to cover his tracks. He had planned this. He had been prepared for the moment when he would silence Ashley once and for all. The terror of knowing this wasn't just a crime of rage, but a cold, calculated act left the team shaken. They now had the evidence they needed to pursue Adam even harder. But the reality of what had been done to Ashley weighed heavily on them. They were fighting for justice, But they also had to contend with the sheer brutality of what had happened. Ashley's family was notified, and the grief began to set in. Her mother, father, and friends could barely comprehend the horror that had befallen their loved one. It was one thing to lose someone. It was another to lose them in such a horrifying and violent way. But they had to be strong. Ashley's death couldn't be in vain. The investigation would continue, and Adam would face justice. But as Donovan walked away from the scene, the image of the suitcase and the remains would stay with her. It wasn't just about solving the case. It was about honoring the life that had been taken so violently. Ashley deserved that. As the investigation continued to unfold, each new detail added weight to the case against Adam. Detective Donovan sat at her desk, sifting through the pile of evidence that had been gathered over the last few days. The dismembered body, the surveillance footage, the missing person report, all of it was pointing in one direction: Adam Densmore. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. She stared at the phone records again, trying to make sense of the timeline. Adam had been in constant contact with various people, but his calls and messages to Ashley were suspiciously few and far between. If he was truly concerned about her disappearance, why hadn't he been reaching out to her friends or family? Why hadn't he tried harder to get in touch with the people who knew her best? Instead, he had withdrawn, leaving a trail of lies and inconsistencies. Then came the breakthrough, a breakthrough that no one had expected. One of Adam's old friends, Mark, came forward to speak with the police. At first, Mark had hesitated, unsure whether he should get involved. But when he saw the news about Ashley's body being found, he couldn't stay silent any longer. He had a story to tell, one that would change everything. Adam told me he had to keep Ashley under control, Mark explained nervously. He said if she ever left him, he would make sure she couldn't escape. He wasn't going to let her ruin his life like that. Mark's words sent a chill down Donovan's spine. Mark continued, "We all knew he had a temper, but this was different. I didn't think he was serious at first, but looking back now, I can see it. He was obsessed with her." This new information was the missing piece. Adam's words were chilling, revealing a pattern of possessiveness and control. He didn't just want Ashley in his life, he needed her there, and he would stop at nothing to make sure she couldn't leave. As the investigation progressed, more details about Adam's behavior began to surface. Detectives learned about the abusive relationship he had with Ashley, a relationship that no one had truly understood until now. There were the emotional outbursts, the constant monitoring, the threats that had become part of their daily life. Ashley had tried to escape before, but Adam had always found a way to pull her back in, convincing her to give him another chance. "God, I should have done something sooner," Mark muttered, as he relived his own failure to intervene. "I never thought it would go this far. I never thought he would actually do something like that." Mark's testimony added weight to the case, but it was still one piece of the puzzle. Detective Donovan knew they had to keep digging. They needed more, something concrete that would tie Adam directly to Ashley's murder. The forensic team worked tirelessly, analyzing every piece of evidence, from the blood spatter in Adam's apartment to the fingerprints on the camping equipment he had purchased. It all began to line up. Adam's purchase of tools, which he had claimed were for a trip to Oklahoma, seemed more like preparations for something far darker. The tools used to dismember Ashley's body matched those items Adam had bought. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that pointed to Adam, it was the psychological evidence. The profile of the man they were dealing with started to come into focus. He wasn't just a man who had snapped in a moment of rage. He was a man who had planned this, a man who had stalked and controlled Ashley, cutting her off from the people who cared about her. With Mark's confession, the forensic evidence, and a clear pattern of abuse, the case was building to a fever pitch. But it still wasn't enough to make an arrest. There were still pieces of the puzzle to be put together, and the most chilling part of it all was that the detectives knew Adam had taken the final step, the step that would ensure Ashley's silence forever. Detective Donovan stared at the wall of evidence, her mind racing. They were getting closer. Adam's lies were unraveling, and the truth was about to come to light. But the question remained. Would they be able to find him before he disappeared again? Adam sat across from Detective Donovan, his eyes shifting nervously as the room grew still. The air between them was thick with tension, his usual confidence replaced by an unsettling quiet. He had been here before, sitting in the same cold, sterile interrogation room, but this time, something felt different. The weight of the evidence was heavy, suffocating, and he could feel it pressing down on him. "Adam," Donovan said calmly, her voice steady but sharp, "we have the evidence. You know it and I know it. It's time to stop lying." Adam shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He avoided her gaze, staring at the table, as if it might offer him some escape from the crushing reality. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said finally, his voice low and defensive. Donovan leaned forward, her eyes never leaving him. "We know what you did, Adam. You were the last person with Ashley. You were seen arguing with her, and your actions have only made things worse. You've lied to us. You've lied to everyone." Adam's breath hitched, but he still didn't speak. Donovan pressed on. "We found the tools, Adam. We found the blood, and we found the suitcase with her body. We know you were there. We know what you did. What we need from you now is the truth." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the lights overhead. Adam's shoulders slumped, the weight of his silence growing heavier with each passing second. Then finally, he looked up at Donovan. His eyes were tired, defeated, and he exhaled slowly as if the confession was a burden he could no longer carry. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Adam said in a low voice, "but she was going to leave me. She was going to take Winter away, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't lose her. I couldn't lose control." Donovan's heart sank as the words left his mouth. She had expected him to deny everything, to keep spinning his web of lies. But this confession, was worse than she could have imagined. "She was just trying to get away from you, Adam," Donovan said softly, trying to hold on to her composure. "She was trying to protect herself, and you—" She paused, searching for words. "You couldn't accept that." Adam's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and anger. "I loved her," he muttered, almost to himself. "I loved her so much. She was my world. But she kept pushing me away. She didn't understand how much I needed her." Donovan didn't let him off the hook. "You didn't love her, Adam. You controlled her. You trapped her. And when she tried to break free, you killed her." His face crumpled at her words, his shoulders shaking slightly. "I didn't want to, but she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't stay. I just wanted her back. I didn't think it would go that far." He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't think I could lose her." The confession hung in the air like a thick fog. Donovan's stomach twisted as she listened to the man who had brutally taken a life and then tried to cover it up. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a calculated act born of obsession, control, and fear. "Where did you do it?" Donovan asked, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside her. Adam paused again, his eyes lowering to the table. "In the apartment. I didn't know what to do. I just snapped when she said she was leaving. It all happened so fast." The confession was chilling. The thought of someone being driven to such lengths, hurting the one person they claimed to love, was almost too much to bear. "Then what?" Donovan pressed. I chopped her up. I didn't know what else to do," Adam said, his voice cracking. "I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to go to jail, so I took her to different places, spread the parts around. I thought maybe they wouldn't find her. Maybe they wouldn't connect it to me." Every word out of Adam's mouth painted a more terrifying picture. The coldness of his actions, his willingness to mutilate her body and then scatter it across miles of land. It was beyond comprehension. This wasn't just a crime of anger. This was the work of a man desperate to hold on to control, even after he had taken everything from her. "You're not getting away with this," Donovan said quietly as she stood up. "You'll answer for everything you did, and Ashley will have justice." Adam didn't respond. He just sat there, defeated. His confession had lifted the weight from his shoulders, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The truth had finally come out, but it was a truth that no one would ever forget. The courtroom was silent as Adam Densmore sat in the defendant's chair, his head bowed in shame. He had confessed to everything, every grisly detail of what he had done to Ashley, but there was still one thing he refused to speak about: the role his family played in the unfolding tragedy. For a long time, the Densmore family had been a black box, shrouded in mystery, secrets, and untold histories. Now those secrets were beginning to leak out, threatening to destroy not just Adam, but everyone connected to him. Detective Donovan knew that to truly understand Adam, she needed to dive deeper into his background. She couldn't just look at his actions, she had to look at the environment he was raised in, the family dynamics, and the psychological pressures that shaped him into the man who could commit such a horrific act. The first step was speaking to Adam's older brother Lucas, who had reluctantly agreed to meet with her. Lucas was a quiet man, a bit older than Adam, with a demeanor that didn't match the intensity of his younger brother's temper. He sat nervously in the small interrogation room, his fingers fidgeting in his lap. "Adam's always been difficult," Lucas began, his voice quiet but tinged with guilt. "But I never thought it would go this far." "What do you mean, difficult?" Donovan asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Lucas hesitated, then spoke, choosing his words carefully. "There was always anger, but I thought he was just frustrated with life. He didn't get along with Dad much. My parents, well, they were never really the nurturing kind. And Adam? He was always the one pushing the boundaries, always the one getting into trouble." Donovan leaned forward. "Was there ever a pattern of behavior? Abuse? Violence?" Lucas's eyes flickered to the door as though checking if anyone was listening. "Not directly, but there were moments. Things would get heated. Dad never really talked to us. It was more about control, and that's what Adam learned. Control. He saw how Dad treated Mom, how he'd throw things, yell, and Adam, he started mimicking it, but in a different way." Donovan scribbled furiously in her notes. "So, you're saying Adam witnessed domestic violence growing up?" Lucas nodded. "Yeah, but it was never obvious, you know. The yelling was behind closed doors. The threats were quiet, but it shaped him. And when he started dating Ashley, I think he thought he could control her too, just like he saw our dad control Mom." It was a chilling insight into Adam's psyche. Donovan could see now that Adam hadn't just been influenced by his own relationships. He had learned the art of manipulation and control from a very early age. His inability to understand the line between love and possession, between care and control, had been ingrained in him by the dysfunction of his home. But there was more. Lucas revealed a startling detail that shocked Donovan to her core. "Adam's always had this thing with obsession," Lucas continued. "It wasn't just about controlling Ashley. He would fixate on people, on things, and when he couldn't have them, he'd just lose it." Donovan's mind raced. This wasn't just a case of jealousy. This was an obsession so deep it consumed Adam completely. "I thought maybe when Ashley left, it would be the breaking point," Lucas murmured. "But I didn't think it would be like this. I never thought he would do what he did." As Lucas fell silent, Donovan absorbed the magnitude of his words. Adam's need to control, the broken model of masculinity he had been taught, and the constant tension at home had all culminated in one tragic moment. But the story didn't end there. The Densmore family was about to become a key part of the public narrative. Adam's actions, rooted in the dysfunction of his upbringing, were being laid bare for the world to see. But there was one more piece of the puzzle, one last secret that could tie everything together. In a final attempt to piece together the emotional weight of the case, Detective Donovan reached out to Adam's mother, who had been silent up until now. She hadn't spoken much during the trial, but her connection to Adam's childhood was about to provide an essential perspective on his development. When she finally agreed to meet, it became clear that there was more to her silence than just grief. "I tried," she said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I tried to protect him from your father, but the damage was done by the time I realized what was happening. I couldn't save him from his own anger. I couldn't stop the way he wanted to control everyone around him." Her words hung in the air. The generational cycle of control, violence, and manipulation had fueled Adam's tragic actions. It wasn't just his fault. It was the result of years of unresolved trauma that had seeped into every facet of his life. As Donovan left the meeting, the weight of the family secret settled heavily on her shoulders. The truth was finally coming together piece by piece. The unraveling of Adam's past was revealing the terrifying undercurrent of violence that had driven him to murder. The question now was, could this revelation bring justice to Ashley Mead's family, or would it simply explain a tragedy that could never be undone? The courtroom was in full swing, and the prosecution had built a strong case against Adam. Yet, as the trial reached its critical juncture, something about the entire situation didn't sit right with Detective Donovan. She had witnessed firsthand the unraveling of Adam Densmore's facade, but something was still missing, one last piece of the puzzle, a deeper layer of deception that might explain everything. Adam's confession had revealed enough to convict him, but there was still a lingering doubt about the true nature of his motivations. What had pushed him to this extreme? Was it just his need for control, or was there something more, a larger, darker force that had been hidden beneath the surface? Donovan knew the truth had to be more complicated than a simple tale of jealousy and rage. As the trial continued, the defense lawyers attempted to paint Adam as a victim, a man driven to madness by the torment of an ungrateful ex-girlfriend. They argued that Ashley had been manipulative, that she had led him on, and that she had driven him to the edge with her constant refusal to get back together. The defense team's strategy was clear. Make Adam seem like the tragic hero, the wronged man who had been pushed too far. They claimed that Ashley's actions had left Adam with no choice but to kill her. They even went so far as to suggest that Ashley had been the one who had tried to control him, that he had been the one to suffer from her emotional abuse. Donovan watched with disgust as the defense lawyer painted a false narrative, trying to cast doubt on the entire case. But she had seen through the lies long ago. The truth was that Adam was a man consumed by his own need for control, unable to deal with rejection or the idea of losing his grip on Ashley. The turning point came when new evidence surfaced, evidence that Adam had been lying about more than just his relationship with Ashley. The investigators had managed to trace his movements with greater precision, and it was clear that his story was riddled with contradictions. The most damning piece of evidence came from Adam's own phone records. The defense had argued that Adam had been traveling to Oklahoma for a family emergency, but the phone records told a different story. Adam had been in contact with multiple people during the time he claimed to be on his way to Oklahoma. He had even sent messages to people asking for advice on how to cover up a crime. His search history revealed something even more chilling. Adam had researched methods of dismembering a body and ways to transport a corpse without leaving evidence. He had actively planned out every step of the murder and the subsequent cover-up. The details were too precise, too deliberate to be a mere act of impulse. Donovan sat in the back of the courtroom, her heart pounding as the weight of the evidence hit her. Adam hadn't just snapped in a moment of rage. No, this was calculated. He had planned it down to the smallest detail and had been preparing for it for weeks. He had carefully constructed a web of lies, first to his family, then to his friends, and finally to the police. Every detail of his story had been carefully crafted to hide the truth. But now, it was all coming apart. The defense lawyers tried to brush off the new evidence, but it was too much. The lies Adam had woven to protect himself began to unravel in front of the entire courtroom. The man who had once portrayed himself as a victim was now revealed as the mastermind behind a horrifying act. The prosecution presented the damning evidence, showing how Adam had used his resources to meticulously plan and execute the murder of Ashley. The jury listened intently, their eyes fixed on Adam as the full scope of his deception became clear. Every attempt Adam had made to cover up the crime now stood exposed. His lies were laid bare for all to see. As the final arguments were made, the room grew heavy with the weight of the truth. Adam had tried to manipulate everyone around him, but in the end, it was his own actions that had betrayed him. His web of deceit had caught up with him, and the lies he had told to protect himself had only made things worse. When the jury deliberated, the air in the courtroom seemed to stand still. But it wasn't long before the verdict was read aloud. Adam Densmore was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The family of Ashley Mead sat in silence as the verdict was read. Justice had been served, but the toll of Ashley's death was felt deeply by all those who had loved her. As Donovan walked out of the courtroom, she couldn't help but think about how easily people like Adam could deceive others. His lies, his manipulation, and his control had affected not just Ashley, but everyone who had been close to him. But now, with the truth finally revealed, Adam would have to face the consequences of his actions. No more lies, no more manipulation. The trial had reached its peak. After weeks of heart-wrenching testimony, the final arguments had been made, and the courtroom sat in a tense silence. Adam Densmore's fate now rested in the hands of 12 strangers, his peers, who would decide if he would face the consequences of his horrific actions or walk away from the crime that had stolen Ashley Mead's life. Detective Donovan stood at the back of the room, her mind replaying the investigation. She remembered the day they discovered Ashley's body, the chilling confession from Adam, and the countless lies he had told to cover his tracks. There was no doubt in her mind that he was guilty, but as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The weight of the case was enormous. It wasn't just about finding a killer. It was about ensuring that justice would be served for a woman who had been silenced, whose life had been violently torn away from her. Donovan had seen how the trial had affected Ashley's family and friends. Their lives had been shattered, their world upended by Adam's actions. They had placed their faith in the legal system, and now it was time for that system to deliver. As the jury deliberated, the tension was unbearable. The clock seemed to tick louder with each passing second. Donovan couldn't shake the image of Ashley's mother, sitting quietly in the front row, clutching her daughter's picture. The pain in her eyes was impossible to ignore, and Donovan knew that no matter what the verdict was, it would never bring Ashley back. Finally, the doors to the jury room opened, and the foreman stepped forward, holding a piece of paper that would determine the course of Adam's future. The room fell into an eerie silence as he began to read. We, the jury, find the defendant, Adam Densmore, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of desecration of a corpse, and guilty of the unlawful possession of a weapon. The words rang out, and for a moment the courtroom was still. Then, Ashley's family, sitting at the front, exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Justice had been served, but the relief felt hollow in the face of their grief. Adam sat motionless, his face ashen, his expression unreadable. He had been found guilty of the most heinous crime, taking the life of a woman who had trusted him. But now the final phase of the trial was about to begin, sentencing. The judge called for a brief recess, and the courtroom emptied briefly, giving everyone a moment to collect their thoughts. Detective Donovan stayed seated, her eyes fixed on Adam as he was escorted from the room. The man who had shattered a family's world, who had destroyed everything Ashley had ever known, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. But as Donovan reflected on the case, something gnawed at her. She had seen Adam's confession, heard the details of his plan, and understood the depth of his obsession. But there was something more troubling, a lingering question about how someone could go so far to control another person, to erase their existence so thoroughly. It wasn't just about possession or jealousy, it was about power, the power to dominate, to eliminate anyone who threatened that control. Adam's actions were monstrous, but they didn't happen in a vacuum. They had been influenced by the toxic environment he had grown up in, the trauma that had shaped his worldview. In his mind, Ashley had become just another possession, someone to control, to manipulate, and when she tried to leave him, he took matters into his own hands. As the trial resumed, the judge began to speak. Adam Densmore, you have been found guilty of heinous crimes, crimes that have caused untold pain to your victim's family. The court will now deliberate on the appropriate sentence. The room fell silent again as the judge paused. Then he spoke the words that sealed Adam's fate. Adam Densmore, you are hereby sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Ashley Mead. This is the maximum sentence allowed by law. May you reflect on your actions in the years to come. The sentence was delivered. Adam's face remained stoic as he was led out of the courtroom. His fate had been decided, but for the Mead family, the sentence was only part of the justice they would never fully receive. As Detective Donovan stood up, she glanced at Ashley's family. Their grief was still raw, but there was a sense of closure. The justice they had been seeking for so long had been delivered. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds, but it was a step toward rebuilding the broken pieces of their lives. The courtroom began to empty, and Donovan walked out into the hallway, her mind still processing everything that had transpired. She had helped bring a killer to justice, but the truth was, there was no true justice for Ashley. There was no undoing the damage, no bringing her back. All Donovan could do was hold on to the hope that, in the end, the truth had been revealed. That at least was something. The trial was over, and the gavel had come down. Adam Densmore had been convicted, sentenced to 50 years in prison. Yet, as Detective Donovan walked out of the courtroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that justice had come at too high a price. A life had been taken, a family had been torn apart, and for all the legal victories, there was no escaping the raw, painful truth. Ashley Mead was gone. As she walked through the crowded courthouse lobby, Donovan glanced over at Ashley's family. They were a group of shattered people, but they had held on through the entire ordeal. There was no joy in their faces, no sign of relief, just the hollow ache of a loss that could never be filled. The verdict had brought them no peace. In the end, justice, no matter how necessary, would never be enough to bring Ashley back. Her mother, Teresa, had been the most vocal throughout the trial. She'd shared her grief with the world, speaking about her daughter with a broken heart, but with a strength that seemed to defy everything. The pain was still etched in her face as she walked out of the courtroom, her eyes empty of any real emotion. All of it, everything she'd fought for, seemed like a fleeting illusion now. Donovan had seen this before, families torn apart by violence. The survivors left to navigate the wreckage, the shattered pieces of their lives scattered in every direction. But Ashley's case had felt different. She was someone with potential, with a future that had been violently stolen from her. She had been more than just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman with dreams, and now that future was gone. Teresa stopped in the hallway, clutching a photograph of Ashley to her chest, her face contorted with grief. Donovan hesitated before walking up to her. There was nothing she could say. No words would make this any easier, but Teresa had always been a pillar of strength, even in the darkest of times. "How are you holding up?" Donovan asked softly, unsure if the words were even enough to convey sympathy. Teresa looked up, her eyes raw with exhaustion. "I don't know," she whispered. "I keep thinking I'll wake up from this nightmare, that my baby will walk through the door. But that's not going to happen, is it?" Donovan shook her head slowly, a lump forming in her throat. There were no answers, no reassurances that would make the pain go away. All she could do was nod in understanding. "I can't understand why this had to happen. She didn't deserve this," Teresa continued, her voice trembling. "She was just trying to live her life. She was just trying to protect Winter from him. And now she's gone." Donovan's mind wandered back to the early days of the investigation, when she had first met Teresa. The hope in her eyes had been undeniable then. She'd believed, like everyone else, that there was a chance to bring Ashley home safely. But now, she saw that hope had been replaced with the crushing weight of loss. No one could ever come back from something like this. The trial had concluded, but for the Meade family, the aftermath would last a lifetime. As they made their way out of the courthouse, they were greeted by a throng of reporters. The media had descended upon them, asking questions, seeking statements, but none of it mattered to them anymore. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to share their grief with the world. They just wanted to be left alone, to mourn the daughter they would never see again. The case was closed. Adam Densmore was going to prison for the rest of his life, and the family had been given the semblance of justice. But it didn't feel like justice at all. It felt like an empty victory, a hollow recompense for a life that could never be restored. As Donovan left the courthouse, she glanced back at Ashley's family one last time. She knew the pain they felt wouldn't disappear with a verdict. There would be no closure, not for them, not for her. There would only be the slow, painful journey of trying to rebuild after the destruction Adam had caused. For Donovan, there was nothing left to do but to remember Ashley, the woman who had loved her daughter fiercely, who had fought for a life of peace, and to carry her memory with her, always. Winter was too young to fully grasp the magnitude of what had happened. At 5 years old, she couldn't yet understand the tragedy that had unfolded, the murder of her mother, the endless media attention, or the legal battle that had consumed the world around her. But one thing was clear: her world had shattered in ways no child should ever experience. After the trial, Winter was placed into the care of her aunt, Kayla, Ashley's older sister. Kayla had always been close to her niece, but now, she was the one tasked with raising her, protecting her from the cruel realities of the world they now lived in. It wasn't an easy transition. The bond that had been shared between Winter and Ashley was irreplaceable, and no one could step into that role completely. But Kayla tried her best, giving Winter the love and stability she needed to begin healing. Their new home was small, but filled with warmth. Kayla decorated Winter's room with soft colors and familiar toys, hoping to provide comfort in a world that had become unrecognizable. She knew the healing process would be slow. There was no quick fix for the pain Winter carried. But Kayla promised herself that she would do everything in her power to make sure Winter grew up with love, safety, and the knowledge that her mother had cared for her deeply. Winter's first few months with Kayla were difficult. She missed Ashley terribly. Kayla could see it in her niece's eyes, the way she clutched at the photograph of Ashley every night before bed, her small fingers tracing the image of her mother. She missed the sound of her mother's voice, the warmth of her hugs, and the comfort of knowing she was safe with her. No matter how hard Kayla tried, she could never replace what Winter had lost. One evening after a particularly difficult day, Winter looked up at Kayla with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "When's Mommy coming home?" Kayla's heart broke. She had never expected the pain of telling a child something so unimaginable. She sat beside Winter, pulling her into her arms, but no words could take away the raw grief that lingered in the air. "Mommy's not coming home, sweetheart," Kayla said softly, "but she's always in your heart, and she's with you in the love she gave you. She'll always be a part of you, Winter." It wasn't easy, and it never would be. But in those moments, Kayla could see glimpses of healing. The little smiles, the moments of play, the laughter that began to fill the house again despite the weight of their sorrow. Over time, Winter began to settle into her new life. She started attending a local school, where she found comfort in the routine, the friendships she slowly built with her classmates, and the compassion shown by her teachers. Kayla made sure Winter had a safe place to express her emotions, whether it was through drawing, playing, or simply talking about her mother. Though Winter was too young to fully understand the complexities of what had happened, she could feel the absence of her mother. It was a constant ache, a missing piece of herself that no one could fill. But Kayla was there, doing everything she could to help her niece process the loss, teaching her that it was okay to grieve and that love could still exist even in the face of tragedy. Months passed, and Winter began to show signs of resilience. She still missed Ashley deeply, but she was learning how to cope with the absence, how to adapt to the life she now had. Kayla's home had become a sanctuary, a place where Winter could grow up without the looming presence of fear or violence that had haunted her mother's life. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. And slowly, the heavy silence that had defined their lives in the wake of Ashley's death began to lift. Winter found small ways to honor her mother's memory. She would draw pictures of her mom, remembering her warmth, her kindness, and her laughter. Sometimes she would sit quietly by the window, gazing out at the sky, as if she were searching for some kind of connection, something to hold on to in a world that had become so uncertain. Kayla often reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Winter had lost so much, but in her resilience, she was teaching Kayla just as much as Kayla was teaching her. The process of healing wasn't linear. It ebbed and flowed. Some days were better than others, but through it all there was one constant. Winter was surrounded by love. And despite the painful legacy of the past, Kayla knew that for Winter, this new life, though built on the ruins of tragedy, could still be filled with hope. In her own quiet way, Winter was beginning to rebuild, and Kayla would be there every step of the way to guide her. Winter had been through more in her short life than any child should ever have to endure. Yet, as she sat on the swings in the playground one warm afternoon, her eyes sparkling with the innocence of youth, there was a noticeable shift. She was no longer the scared little girl who clung to the past, the one who had experienced the crushing loss of her mother at the hands of the man she had once called her father. She had begun to live again, free from fear. It had been nearly a year since Adam had been sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Ashley Mead, and the darkness that had once consumed Winter's life seemed to have faded into the background. She had adjusted to her new life with her Aunt Kayla, who had given her the love and safety she needed to heal. Kayla had kept her promise to protect Winter, providing a home where the shadows of the past no longer loomed over her every step. Winter's school had become a place where she was thriving. She had made friends, good friends, who didn't see her as a tragedy or a victim. To them, she was just Winter, the bright, creative girl who loved to draw and build things out of blocks. They didn't know about the horrors she had faced, and they didn't need to. In their eyes, she was simply a child, and that's how she wanted to be seen. Kayla watched from the sidelines, a sense of pride swelling in her chest as she observed Winter play with her new friends. There were no more moments of silence when Winter would retreat into herself, clutching her mother's photograph as she used to. The heavy sadness that once defined their home was gone. It had been replaced with laughter, the kind of laughter that belonged to a child who no longer feared what tomorrow might bring. Kayla knew this wasn't an easy process, that the journey to healing was not a straight line. There were still hard days, still moments when Winter would ask about Ashley, her mother's absence weighing heavily on her small heart. Kayla had taught her to remember Ashley's love, to carry that love forward, and to honor the memory of the woman who had given everything for her. But they no longer lived in the shadow of the past. Winter had learned to live with it, and more importantly, she had learned to live beyond it. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Winter turned to Kayla with a thoughtful expression. "Aunt Kayla," she began, "Mommy's in the sky now, right?" Kayla smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Winter's face. Yes, sweetheart, Mommy's up there watching over you. Winter nodded, her small brow furrowing in concentration. I think she'd want me to be happy. She wouldn't want me to be sad anymore. Kayla's heart broke at the sweetness of Winter's words. It was true. Ashley would want Winter to find joy again, to move forward and live a full life. She would want Winter to experience the world without the constant fear that had once clouded her existence. You're right, Kayla said gently. She'd want you to be happy, and I know she's so proud of you. Winter grinned, a wide, carefree smile that lit up her entire face. For a moment, Kayla could see the child she had always been, a girl full of potential, eager to explore the world with an open heart. It was in moments like these that Kayla felt the weight of Ashley's loss the hardest, but also the most beautiful, because it meant that Winter was finally free, free to be a child, free to embrace life. As Winter's life moved forward, so did Kayla's. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving, about moving from the darkness of the past into the light of a future that, while scarred, was still full of promise. And so, together, they forged ahead. They didn't forget what had happened, but they no longer let it define them. Winter's future, her future without fear, was just beginning. And in that new chapter, there was hope. There was hope that she would grow up in a world of love, not violence. Hope that she would one day help others understand the strength it took to rebuild a life after unimaginable loss. As Winter laughed with her friends, her joy echoed through the backyard. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of life. And for the first time in a long time, it was a sound Kayla would never take for granted. What do you think of Adam Densmore's actions in this case? From which region are you watching this video? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. On a scale from 0 to 10, how shocking do you find this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories.